I've always been a man of routine. I'd wake up early, make breakfast, get everything in order for the day, and before leaving for work, I always made sure to hug my son. It was our little ritual, a tight hug, a kiss on the forehead, and a "Daddy will be right back." But lately, something has changed. Every time I grabbed my keys or put on my shoes, Noah would disappear, literally vanish. I'd call out, search the house, and when I finally found him, he was hiding, under the bed, inside the closet, or behind the curtains, trembling. And when I asked why, he'd only whisper one word: "Mommy." At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just separation anxiety, something common in young children. I read articles, talked to colleagues, and everyone said it was a phase. But my son's gaze, that look of fear, it wasn't something that could be explained by child psychology. Gradually, he began to change. He didn't want to play anymore, he didn't smile. And every time I came home from work, he clung to me as if he had survived a war. I started paying more attention. The tension between him and his mother, the long silences, the downcast eyes. Something very wrong was happening in our home. But how can a father protect his son from something he can't see? How could I have imagined that within the home I built with so much effort, the greatest danger for my son was lurking, when the only clue was a fragile whisper, a single word: "Mommy." And even then it took me too long to understand what was really happening. Before we continue, comment below which city and country you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That morning, everything seemed normal. The alarm went off at 6. I made coffee, packed Noah's lunchbox with his favorite cookies, and went to call him from his room. He was awake, sitting on the bed, looking at the door as if he were expecting something, or someone. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but it was a weak, quick smile, as if he were relieved to see me there. I asked if he slept well, and he just nodded. His silence bothered me, but I preferred not to force it. We went to the kitchen together. He ate in silence, and then it happened again. When I grabbed my backpack and keys, he simply vanished. I called out to him a few times until I heard a noise coming from the room. I opened the door, and there he was, huddled behind the curtain, his eyes wide. "Son, what's wrong?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He just shook his head negatively, as if he wanted me not to ask anything else. "What are you afraid of?" I insisted. And then came the answer. One word, low, almost a whisper: "Mommy." That caught me off guard. I tried to hide my shock, smiled, and said everything would be all right. But something inside me began to break. Why would he be afraid of his own mother? I dropped Noah off at school and went to work with that word hammering in my head. Mom. That was it. And yet, it hurt like a whole sentence being screamed in my ear. During the day, I tried calling Lauren, but she didn't answer. When I got home that night, I found the two of them watching TV. Noah was sitting far away from her, hugging a pillow. I asked if everything was all right, and he just looked at me. That was the beginning of something bigger. I just didn't know what yet. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the expression on my son's face. He had never acted like that before. Even on difficult days, Noah was always affectionate and spontaneous. That version of him, quiet, scared, distant, was new and deeply disturbing. I started paying more attention. I noticed that he only smiled when I was around. When Lauren entered the room, he would shrink back a little. Sometimes he would even change rooms. But Lauren always seemed normal. Too normal even. Kind, present, as if she wanted to convince me, or convince herself, that everything was under control. The next day I tried to talk to her. Calmly, I said that I thought Noah was going through something, that he was acting strangely scared, and I asked if she had noticed anything. Her reaction was immediate and aggressive. She said I was exaggerating, that I had always been too lenient with him, that I was raising a weak child. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to process it. I hadn't expected such a defensive reaction. The conversation ended with her yelling and saying that if I didn't trust her as a mother, then maybe I should stay home and take care of the boy alone. That left a bitter taste in my mouth. At that moment, I realized something very wrong was happening, but I still didn't know how to prove it. I started writing everything down. Every strange behavior, every phrase Noah said, every reaction of hers. And from that day on, I decided I would never leave home again without being sure my son was safe. I just didn't imagine the truth would come to light so brutally and so quickly. The following days were marked by a tense silence in the house. Noah continued to act fearful, avoiding his mother and clinging to me whenever possible. I started leaving the house later, making up excuses at work, just to make sure everything was calm before I went. At night, when I asked him how his day had been, he would look away, say it was normal, and change the subject. Once I saw a small bruise on his arm. I asked what had happened, and he replied that he fell at school, but something in his expression didn't add up. It seemed like a rehearsed script, a prepared lie. That same week, I was called to the school. Noah's teacher, Mrs. Melinda Rhodes, was waiting for me with a serious expression. She began by saying that Noah's behavior had changed. He, who had previously been participative and cheerful, was now isolated, drawing alone in the corner of the room. Then she showed me a drawing he had made. It was a house with 3 figures. One of them had its mouth open, clearly screaming. The other 2 were crying. He said it's his mommy yelling at him, the teacher explained. My stomach churned. At that moment, I realized it was no longer a suspicion. It was a cry for help. I returned home with a heavy heart. I didn't know how to approach Lauren about it. I thought about confronting her again, but I remembered the last argument and Noah's fear. If I exploded, everything could get worse. So I decided to observe. I started leaving the house, but I would return earlier, as a surprise. Sometimes I would find Noah alone in his room, sometimes watching TV with his mother, but always quiet, tense. That's when an idea began to form in my head. If I couldn't get answers through words, maybe it was time to look for images. I bought small hidden cameras and installed them in strategic places around the house. One in the hallway, another in the living room, one in the kitchen. I also put one in Noah's room, but facing the door, never the bed. My focus was on knowing what happened when I wasn't there. I turned on the equipment and set it to record everything automatically. The feeling was strange, as if I were violating the privacy of my own home. But at that moment, protecting my son was more important than any discomfort. I needed proof. I needed to see with my own eyes what he couldn't tell me. In the first few days, the recording seemed normal. Banal conversations, moments of silence. But then, a week later, on an ordinary morning, I saw it. The recording showed Lauren entering Noah's room right after I left. She spoke to him in a low tone, but her words were harsh. "You're going to stop making that victim face right now," she said. "If you make your father suspicious again, I swear you'll be grounded until you learn." Noah tried to argue, but she yelled, loudly, the kind of yell that breaks a child inside. I paused the video, took a deep breath, and knew it was time to act. After watching that recording, I carefully reviewed all the material. Within a few days, the images revealed a consistent pattern of psychological abuse. Lauren didn't just yell at Noah, she humiliated him, threatened him, and sometimes isolated him. One video in particular destroyed me inside. He had left a toy on the living room floor, and when she tripped, she started screaming as if she had been assaulted. Noah, desperate, cried and apologized, but she wouldn't stop. She told him to go to his room, turned off the lights, and locked him inside. I could hear him calling for me in the dark. That killed me. I stopped recording. I'd had enough. I called a lawyer, then Child Protective Services. I made an appointment and brought the footage. The operator watched the images with a tense expression. When she finished, she looked at me silently for a few seconds and said, "We'll take action immediately." I left there trembling, but with a glimmer of hope in my heart. That night, I didn't tell Lauren anything. I went home, bathed Noah, told him stories as always, and promised myself that this would be the last night he lived in that fear. 2 days later, I was called to a meeting with the Child Protective Services. They had already contacted the police and were preparing an emergency protection order. I handed over everything: the videos, the school reports, the changes in behavior, everything documented. They asked me not to alert Lauren and that they would act within 48 hours. The waiting was the worst part. I slept little, stayed alert to every sound in the house, trying to protect Noah in any way I could. With every fake laugh from Lauren, every forced touch of affection, my anger grew. But I restrained myself. I needed to keep the plan going. The next day, the summons arrived. Lauren was called to testify. She was surprised, tried to accuse me of plotting against her, and shouted that I was trying to take her son away. But the videos spoke louder. Faced with the pressure, she began to deny everything. She said Noah was manipulative, that I always turned him against her. But no one there believed her words anymore. When they watched the recordings, the atmosphere changed. The silence was heavy. She tried to leave, but was prevented. From then on, the separation process officially began. Noah would no longer have to be alone with her. I went home with him that afternoon and cried. For the first time, I let him see me vulnerable. I hugged my son tightly and told him that everything was going to change. He looked at me with big eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. It wasn't a full smile, but it was real. And in that small gesture, I saw the beginning of healing. The following days were intense. With the restraining order in place, Lauren had to leave the house temporarily. Noah and I were left alone, trying to rebuild a routine that made sense for both of us. At first, he still hid when he heard the door open or any loud noise. It took him a while to understand that his mother wouldn't come back to hurt him. Every night I told him different stories, but they all had happy endings. I needed him to believe again that the world could be a safe place. Gradually, I saw his confidence beginning to return. We started attending child therapy sessions. The psychologist was a sweet, patient woman who talked to Noah at his own pace. At first, he only drew. He didn't talk much. But in each drawing, different colors emerged, expressions became less tense, trees with leaves appeared, and people smiled. The therapist told me that this was a good sign, that he was processing. I also started psychological counseling. I needed to understand why I took so long to see what was right before my eyes. Guilt consumed me in silence. But every time I saw Noah playing, running, or spontaneously hugging me, I understood. There was still time to make amends. Justice took its course. Lauren was prohibited from approaching Noah while the investigations continued. Her defense tried to overturn the decision, alleging parental alienation on my part, but the videos were irrefutable. There was no possible argument against that. Still, I faced disapproving looks from her family, threatening messages from some acquaintances, and an avalanche of veiled judgments. But I was ready. For the first time, I knew exactly which side I was on, and I would never hesitate again. Protecting my son was, and always would be, my top priority. At home, Noah started asking questions. He wanted to understand why his mother yelled, why he couldn't see her anymore. I answered carefully but honestly. I said that some people, even when they say they love, sometimes get lost and do bad things. That true love never hurts, never scares, never threatens. And that he deserved good love, love that embraces. He listened quietly with attentive little eyes, and after a few seconds of silence, there would always be that tight hug. It was his way of saying, "I understand, Dad, and I'm starting to trust." One night we were watching a cartoon and Noah laid his head on my shoulder. Out of nowhere, he said, "Daddy, I like it better when it's just us." My heart ached, not because he rejected his mother, but because it showed how much he had suffered. I hugged him, kissed his forehead, and replied, "You're safe now. Nothing will hurt you while I'm here." And in that instant, I realized that, even after everything we had faced, there was still room to rebuild. There was still light, and I would hold on to that light with all my strength. As the weeks passed, Noah began to show small changes that, to me, meant the world. He went back to playing in the yard, laughing at the silly jokes I always made, and even wanted to help make pancakes on Sunday, our old ritual. Seeing that sparkle in his eyes reborn was like breathing after almost drowning. But even so, there were times when he withdrew. Sometimes I would stop everything and ask if Mommy is coming back today. And whenever I said no, he would let out a sigh that mixed relief and fear. It was as if he still didn't fully believe in peace. Therapy continued to help, but there were deep wounds. Noah was afraid to sleep alone. He wanted my constant presence, even in the bathroom. I tried to respect his time, showing him that everything was all right. Every time he said, "Thank you, Dad," for no apparent reason, I understood that it was his way of saying thank you for protecting me. It was a silent gratitude that affected me more than anything else. And yet, I didn't consider myself a hero. I blamed myself for not acting sooner, for not noticing the signs, for letting his fear grow so much. One day, while cleaning out a cupboard, I found one of Noah's first drawings, the one the teacher had shown. I stared at that paper for minutes. It was more than a drawing, it was a silent complaint, a cry for help. And I thought about how many children must be screaming inside without anyone hearing them. At that moment, I decided that my mission was not only to protect my son, but also to help other parents open their eyes. Sometimes, the signs are there. The silence, the fear, the withdrawal. But we prefer to believe that everything is all right. I started writing about our story, not with sensationalist details, but as a warning. I shared it in parenting forums, support groups, and social media. I received hundreds of messages. Fathers and mothers saying they started paying closer attention to their children, that they had doubts, fears, and that my story had raised an alarm. Others, unfortunately, told stories similar to mine. I realized that silence is the greatest ally of abuse, and that love cannot be blind, it needs to be attentive, present, because what is at stake is not only a child's emotional well-being, but their integrity, their future, their soul. As for Lauren, she began to change her tune. He went from denying everything to saying he was sick, that he needed help. He asked to see Noah. The judge ruled that for the time being, there would be no contact. The priority was his emotional recovery. It was difficult to explain this to Noah, who still carried the confusion of loving and fearing the same person. But with time, he began to understand that love shouldn't cause fear. And finally, one night, he told me, "Dad, I know you'll always protect me, right?" And with tears in my eyes, I replied, "Always, son, always." Time passed, and although the wounds were still there, Noah began to show signs of a lighter childhood. He went back to playing with other children, smiling for no reason, humming songs while drawing. Seeing that transformation was moving, but there was a part of me that remained on constant alert. I mentally relived the videos, the screams, the panicked looks from my son. I couldn't forget. Justice was taking its course, slow as always, and I needed to stand firm in my decision not to allow contact between him and Lauren, even in the face of external pressures. It was a daily battle between heart and reason. One afternoon, I received a letter from Lauren's lawyer requesting a new hearing to reassess the visitation schedule. According to him, she had started psychological treatment and was repentant. I read those words with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Repentant? After everything she had done, she wanted a second chance? But my priority was Noah, not my anger. I scheduled a meeting with his psychologist and carefully asked if he was ready to hear about the possibility of seeing his mother. The professional's answer was clear. Not yet. Any contact now could destabilize everything we've managed to rebuild. I respected that. I respected my son's timing. And for the first time in years, I prioritized his emotional well-being above any ideal of a traditional family. Because I finally understood that having a father and mother together means nothing if one of them represents fear, pain, and confusion. A true family is one that welcomes, protects, and listens. And at that moment, our family was just the two of us. And that was enough. It was enough love, enough security, enough truth. For the first time, the house was silent, but it was a good silence, full of peace. Meanwhile, I continued documenting everything. I followed each step of the process, gathered reports from therapy sessions, testimonies from the school, statements from the social worker. I wouldn't leave room for doubt. With each document I added, I thought about protecting Noah not only from the present, but also from the future. Because one day, he would grow up. He would ask questions. Whether he wanted to or not, he would try to understand why things happened the way they did. And I wanted to be ready to say, I fought for you, son. I did everything in my power to give you a new chance. One night, as I was putting him to bed, he held my hand tightly and said, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be like you, really strong. That broke me, because I knew he wasn't talking about muscles, about bravery. He was talking about the strength of not giving up, of being there for him, of listening even when he said nothing. And I, who had spent so much time blaming myself for not acting sooner, understood at that moment. Perhaps true strength lies not in predicting everything, but in acting at the right time, in not running away when pain knocks on the door. The final hearing arrived on a rainy morning, the kind that seems to match the weight of what's to come. My lawyer and I arrived early. Lauren was there too, accompanied by her lawyer. She seemed different, more dejected, less combative, but still that cold look remained. During the session, the judge heard all the testimonies, from the therapist, the social worker, the teacher, and finally, mine. We showed the videos again. The images spoke louder than any words. Lauren tried to justify her behavior as a result of extreme stress, but no one there seemed convinced. The evidence was clear, and the judge knew it. Finally, the decision was read. Noah's custody would remain entirely with me, and any attempt at contact by Lauren would depend on a new psychological evaluation and judicial authorization. She temporarily lost all visitation rights. When the judge finished, Lauren cried. For the first time, I saw tears in her eyes, but they were tears that no longer moved me, because what she was crying wasn't regret, it was loss. Loss of control, of power. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to understand the damage she had caused. But at that moment, my only concern was what I would take home. Peace. We left the courthouse in silence. Noah was with a trusted friend who looked after him during these hearings. When I went to get him, he ran to me and hugged me tightly. "Are you okay now, Dad?" he asked. I smiled and replied, "Yes, son, yes." And that hug wasn't just a gesture of affection. It was a silent agreement, a mutual promise of protection and love. From that moment on, I knew that our journey of pain was finally taking on a new tone, that of reconstruction. With the end of the process, our lives began to get back on track. I went back to work with more flexible hours. I was able to spend more time at home, closely following each stage of Noah's growth. He made friends again, started playing sports at school, and became interested in cartoons again. Sometimes when I least expected it, he would surprise me with little phrases like, "Dad, today was a good day," or "You make me feel safe." And each of these phrases was like a brick in a new house we were building together, a house without shouting, without fear, only with love. Even during difficult times when he had relapses, nightmares, or complicated questions, I learned not to run away. I learned to listen, not to minimize. I learned that being a father isn't just about protecting from the world, but also helping to understand that world, even when it's cruel. And every time he laid his head in my lap and sighed with relief, I understood that we were winning. Not all at once, but day by day. Because healing doesn't come in a package. It comes in small gestures, in the peaceful routine, in the silence that no longer hurts. One day, he asked me to draw with him. We sat at the kitchen table and he began. A house, trees, the sun smiling. 2 figures holding hands. "That's you and me, Dad." I looked at that drawing with teary eyes and could only say, "It's beautiful, son." Because it was more than a drawing. It was a declaration. Of love, of trust, of overcoming. It was the portrait of a home rebuilt with patience and courage. Months have passed since that day at the courthouse, and although the scars are still there, they don't hurt like they used to. Noah is 7 years old now, and it's incredible to see how much he's grown in such a short time. He's grown not only in height, but in courage. He still has difficult days, of course. Sometimes he wakes up scared, with memories he can't quite explain, but he can already talk about it. He can say, "Today I was scared," or "I dreamed about bad things." And that, for me, is a huge victory, because healing begins when the pain finds space to be spoken and heard. Today we have our own rituals. Every night before bed, he asks me to stay in the room for 5 more minutes. He doesn't need to say anything else. I lie down next to him, and we stay silent. Sometimes he holds my hand. Other times he just breathes deeply, as if that moment were enough. It's in those moments that I realize how much he is reconnected with the idea of security, and more importantly, with the idea that he deserves to be loved lightly, without fear, without demands. This is something I make a point of repeating to him constantly, because I know that one day he will grow up and take this with him. Lauren still hasn't gotten back in touch. The process continues, and I remain firm in my decision to protect my son, not out of revenge, but out of responsibility. If one day she truly changes, if she proves herself with actions and not words, then perhaps there will be a future conversation. But that day hasn't arrived yet, and I won't force it. Because right now all that matters is Noah's well-being. He's been through too many storms already, and he deserves to live under a clear sky, even if it takes time for him to trust the sun again. Looking back, I understand how easy it is to fall into the illusion that everything is fine. We trust, we idealize, we think we know people. And sometimes, danger lurks within the home, disguised as routine, as normality. If I could go back in time, I would have listened sooner to that whisper, "Mommy." But I also know that there's no point in living with guilt. The important thing is that I listened in time, and I acted, because loving a child isn't just saying, "I love you." It's being attentive. It's making difficult decisions. It's protecting even when it means breaking with everything that society calls the perfect family. Today our family is small, but it's whole. Noah and I. 2 hearts that went through fire and came out stronger. And if there's one thing this story has taught me, it's that true love doesn't shout, doesn't scare, doesn't hurt. True love is the kind that builds shelter, that wipes away tears, that remains when everything crumbles, and that even after the most violent storm, manages to teach someone to smile again. My son smiles, and because of that, I know it was worth fighting for.